Texas men's basketball finishes their final week of the regular season. Texas women's basketball sends off the Erwin Center in style, and Texas baseball shows out over the weekend in Houston. All this and more on College Press Box. Good evening and welcome into College Press Box. I'm your host, Jason Kinander. We have a packed show for you today. It was a particularly eventful week on the 40 acres, especially for the men's and women's basketball programs, as Texas celebrated the final week of the Frank Erwin Center. Up first was the men's team, who played host to 6th-ranked Baylor on Monday. I was live at the Frank Erwin Center to see the ranked matchup play out. Here's how the Longhorns fared in their final home game of the season.
Senior night at the Frank Erwin Center as Texas men's basketball would celebrate their final home game after over 40 years playing at the historic venue. Number 6 Baylor in town for an ever-important home finale as the Longhorns would get off to a quick start thanks to a blistering defense that would hold Baylor scoreless for over 5 minutes in the first half. The Bears would miss 7 of their first 8 three-point shots. Texas was able to stretch a lead out to as many as 7 in the first half, but Baylor closed the gap towards the end as it would take a pair of buckets from Devin Askew to give Texas a 3-point lead at the break. It would be all Baylor from there, however, as guards James Akinjo and Adam Flagler caught fire, each finishing with 19 points on the night. Texas could not get anything to fall, shooting 40% from the field, 60% from the line, and a dreadful 4 of 25 from deep. Christian Bishop and Marcus Carr led Texas with 13 points apiece in potentially their final home game with the Longhorns, but it wouldn't be nearly enough as Texas would miss 9 of their final 12 shots en route to a 68-61 loss. Here's what men's basketball head coach Chris Beard had to say after the final game at the Frank Erwin Center.
Obviously, the outcome of the game's disappointing for us, but it can't, and it should not take away from the last game ever in the Erwin Center. You know, a sellout, a great environment, 2 top 25 teams playing. I thought it was a great game. I thought it was a great atmosphere.
After 45 years, thousands of games, moments, and memories, the door is finally closed on the Frank Erwin Center. Baylor 68, Texas 61, as the Longhorns are unable to close out this historic venue with a win. For one final time from the Erwin Center, on behalf of Texas Student Television, I'm Jason Kinander. Have a great night.
I am now lucky to be joined by our men's basketball analyst, Adam Ogburn. Adam, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good to be on tonight, Jason.
So, 2 straight losses to end the regular season for the Longhorns, and despite giving Kansas all that they could handle on Saturday, overtime thriller at Allen Fieldhouse, Texas still fell short in their final 2 games. What stood out to you particularly on Saturday in the regular season finale?
Yeah, always a tough task going up to Allen Fieldhouse in Kansas, but I thought the defensive effort by Texas was outstanding throughout, especially in the final seconds of the game. Timmy Allen doing a great job of stripping Ochai Agbaji after Devin Askew pulled off a crucial trap in the final seconds to prevent Kansas from getting a shot. And then Courtney Ramey again doing a great job of shutting down Ochai Agbaji, who didn't make a shot in regulation. So, now going onto the offensive side, Courtney Ramey, he was hot. He was 3 of 5 from 3-point range, 18 points overall. It's the first time he was in double digits in the last 9 games. He's got 9 games dating all the way back to that game up in Lubbock against Texas Tech. And so, you look at that, and then you look at guys like Jace Febres for the Longhorns, 14 points a week ago against West Virginia, only 3 today. So it's been up and down, Texas has. But I thought against Kansas, defense played well, and they're going to need guys alongside Ramey to really step up if they want to make a run in March.
Absolutely. I think that the veteran contributions, Ramey, Febres, 2 of the guys that you noted, guys that have played better down the stretch, but they will need to continue to play well as March gets deeper. So, second question, Texas's path to the Big 12 tournament, a little interesting. First round, they'll take on TCU, a team that they handled easily in the regular season, but likely Kansas in the second round. How is their path shaping up, and what do you think this team's ceiling is in March?
Yeah, I actually like Texas' path in the Big 12 tournament. I think they definitely drew the better half of the bracket. They split against the 1 seed Kansas after falling just short in overtime this past weekend. And you look at the other side, Baylor and Texas Tech. I mean, Texas has at least proven an ability to neutralize Kansas star man Ochai Agbaji. I think big man for Kansas, David McCormick, he'll be a little bit of a concern for the Longhorns, but don't want to already be looking at Kansas. Obviously, Texas will face TCU in the second round of the Big 12 tournament in their first game. Texas beat them both times this year. TCU did give them quite a challenge here in the Erwin Center, though. Texas was down at halftime in that game, but I think, even though TCU, they've proven too, they beat Kansas and Tech this past week, but they lost to West Virginia this past week. And I think this is a caliber of team that Texas really should be expecting to beat if they want to make a run in March. But, it's Big 12. The parity is insane. You got to probably expect a close one. But beyond Kansas, I think beating Baylor or Texas Tech, if Texas does make a run all the way to the final, it's going to be a tall ask. But, as wide open as the Big 12 is, I don't think you can rule it out. And then, looking forward into March, I think Texas, Chris Beard has never lost in the first round. Even with Arkansas Little Rock, he went and knocked off Purdue in the first round of the tournament. So, Texas, they're probably going to be around that kind of 5 seed line. Makes you a little bit nervous because that notoriety of the 5-12 matchup. If you're looking at teams like maybe like a Loyola Chicago, maybe sneak in there around the 12 line. But, Texas only gives up 59.5 points per game, which is best in the Big 12. And you know what they say, defense travels well. I think that would be the key to this Texas team, which is only scoring 68.6 points per game, which is just 6th in the Big 12. So it's that defense that Texas showed in the winning moments against Kansas, denying them a shot at the end of regulation. I think this team is talented enough to avoid a first-round loss. Chris Beard's teams historically do really well in March. And so I think they're going to be prepared for a second-round matchup against a team of equal skill. So that's why I think Sweet 16 is a realistic target. And if absolutely everything goes right, if you get a favorable matchup, especially with how this team is hung with Baylor and Kansas, maybe Elite 8. I think Elite 8 is the ultimate ceiling. Sweet 16 is a little bit more of a realistic target, but I think this team is well primed to win its first tournament game in 8 years.
Completely agree. The veteran leadership has been huge. Beard has a great record in the first round of the NCAA tournament. So Texas should be in pretty good shape in March. Final question. Texas men's and women's basketball both celebrated the final game at the Erwin Center this past week. The Erwin Center has been around since 1977. Start of next season, the Moody Center will replace it as the home of Texas basketball. So it has been a very iconic arena. History, performances, unforgettable basketball games. What are some of the top moments from Texas men's basketball at the Drum?
Well, man, it's 45 years, so it's hard to fit everything in, but I think there are definitely a couple games to note. I think one team to note, how about the 2003 Texas team with, TJ Ford and Royal Ivy? They went 14-0 at the Drum and then eventually went on to make a Final Four run. So definitely a special team there. But, about specific games at the Erwin Center, I think you have Kevin Durant's final home game back in 2007. Texas was ranked 15 facing A&M, who was ranked 7th. It was a wild showdown. Went to double overtime. Texas pulling out a 98-96 nail-biting victory. Kevin Durant had 30 points and 16 rebounds on that night. 16,755 people packed in there. So it was definitely packed to the brim. And then you go 8 years later, 2015, Texas had another big matchup. This one was in December. It was a non-conference game against Blue Blood, North Carolina. Game was tied at 82 in the final seconds. Isaiah Taylor takes it down the court, misses from three-point range, but the ball fell just right for Javon Felix to get a quick shot off before the buzzer sounded. Just an unbelievable 84-82 victory. If you haven't heard Longhorn broadcaster Craig Way's call of that moment, well worth a listen. And then how about what Chris Beard has done for the student section, for the fan base here at Texas? I think that win over Kansas earlier this year, that late transitional three, that jump shot by Timmy Allen, storming the court afterwards, I think that was a special moment. Seeing the Erwin Center full again, these last couple of years, you've really seen it where that upper deck has been empty at times. It's been packed to the brim. They've been trying to find every single seat just to get students in who want to come. That Texas Tech game was special. So what Chris Beard has done and what that win over Kansas, definitely another special moment in the Erwin Center's final year.
Thank you very much for joining us tonight, Adam. Of course, Erwin Center very much celebrated in Austin for the University of Texas. Now, before we end our men's basketball segment, our very own Cecelia Rodriguez was lucky enough to sit down with a pair of the biggest Longhorn basketball fans. We will play for you Cecilia's interview with the Hawaiian shirt guy and the extremely loud guy, two student fans who the student body certainly won't forget, even with the season and the Erwin Center being over.
It's a packed house in the Frank Erwin Center. As the ball tips off, the spotlight turns to two superfans who found their way to reserved front row seating and into closed team practices. Jonathan Stewart and Maman Ahmed, better known as Hawaiian shirt guy and incredibly loud guy, grew up a block away from each other.
I've been going to basketball, football games since I was a young kid. My dad kind of brainwashed me into just full Longhorn fan. Yeah, so it doesn't feel anything out of the ordinary to go to a game early and be loud. That's just what I would do naturally.
The best friends became celebrities on campus when the men's basketball social media team posted about them. Soon after, Coach Chris Beard noticed and invited them to meet the team. The two admitted that during games they did try to get on camera, but did not expect anyone to take notice.
Did not think that I was going to meet the team or anything like that. I thought it was maybe should be like one kind of like cool tweet kind of save.
Maman was noticed soon after Jonathan as incredibly loud guy.
A lot of eyes were on Jonathan since he got known as Hawaiian shirt guy, and I was always next to him. And I think that when they started watching him, they could hear me be very loud.
Their new roles come with a lot of pressure, like wearing the trademark shirt.
I would say very highly encouraged, but I would never not wear the shirt anymore. It's just part of it's a game day outfit now. There's no reason to change it.
And as for Maman, he feels pressure to be louder than everyone else.
I do. Sometimes I'll be at games and I just should take a couple possessions off, and I'm like, I can't do that.
Let's just hope they don't lose the voice or the shirt anytime soon for the sake of the team. With TSTV Sports, I'm Cecelia Rodriguez.
Thank you very much for that, Cecelia, and thank you again for joining us tonight, Adam. When we return on this episode of College Press Box, we will see if Texas women's basketball was able to close out the Erwin Center with a win. We'll be right back. Welcome back into College Press Box as we now transition from men's to women's basketball. Texas women's basketball had a redemption chance after the men's team could not close out the Frank Erwin Center correctly. The women's team had a chance against Oklahoma State on Saturday night to close out the Frank Erwin Center with a win. Here are Saturday night's highlights. For a trio of Texas seniors, there is Audrey Warren on the feed from Joanne Allen Taylor. Second play, Lauren Ebo down low. There are the three seniors playing in their final home games for the Longhorns. Now here's a corner pass to Aaliyah Mathuru as Texas would get off to a 20-point first quarter lead, thoroughly dominating the first half. Here's freshman phenom Rory Harmon stepping back, 20-point halftime lead for the top 10 ranked Longhorns looking to close out the Erwin Center correctly. Oklahoma State wouldn't let them do it easily. Here is Micah Dennis with a shot to fall. Another shot from Dennis from the corner for three. Oklahoma State picking up a little bit of momentum, but it would be too little, too late. The Longhorns really wanted this one, and they got it. Harmon with the quick move inside to Ebo. She led the way with 17 points and 6 rebounds. Texas one last time. It's Mathuru with the shifty move, the floater, and the finish. Texas would go on to win 65-50, closing out the Erwin Center in style. And we now welcome in our women's basketball analyst, Carter Yates. Thank you for joining us tonight, Carter.
Hey, happy to be here.
So Texas was able to win on their senior night, final regular season game in the Erwin Center. What went right?
Well, Jason, the last time I came on College Press Box to talk about the Lady Longhorns, they were just coming off back-to-back losses against Baylor. I said on the show that Texas needed more production in the paint area, both in scoring and rebounding. Well, Texas has responded since those two losses to Baylor, going on an 8-game win streak to finish out the season 23-6 overall and 13-5 in conference play, earning a number 3 seed in next week's Big 12 tournament. And the biggest difference in this run has been the Longhorns' efficiency in the paint. On Saturday against Oklahoma State, Texas scored 34 points in the paint compared to the Cowgirls' 22. In fact, in their 8-game win streak, Texas has outscored their opponent in the paint all but one time. But it's not just on the offensive end that the Longhorns are showing major improvement. Texas is now first in the Big 12 in terms of scoring defense, limiting their opponents to merely 55.8 points per game. Texas also leads the Big 12 with a 7.03 turnover margin, meaning they force 7 times more turnovers than they cough up. The Longhorns' turnover margin is 7.03 right now, like I said, and the next best is Baylor with a 2.67. Senior center Lauren Ebo is starting to come into her own down the stretch, scoring in double figures in 3 of the last 4 games. She's now also in the top 10 rebounders in the conference with 7 boards a game, as well as averaging 3 offensive rebounds per game. So she's allowing the Longhorns to get more second chance points. But Lauren Ebo is going to have a big challenge coming up in this Big 12 tournament when Texas faces off against number 6 seed Kansas State and the Big 12's leading scorer in center Ayoka Lee.
You mentioned that matchup against 6 seed Kansas State. Let's get a little preview of that game and of the Big 12 tournament. Hopefully the Lady Longhorns will advance past the first round. What can we expect?
Well, we just mentioned the Wooden Award finalist in Ayoka Lee, who is leading the Big 12 in scoring with almost 23 points per game, and who is second in the conference with over 10 rebounds a contest. But Texas head coach Vic Schaefer has had all the answers for how to stop Lee in the first 2 games between these 2 teams. Against the Longhorns this year, Lee has shot only 41% from the field, down from her season average of 56.1%. And therefore, the Longhorns have won both of the matchups by double-digit points. Schaefer is going to have to stay creative and throw new defenses at Lee to make her uncomfortable because she's the best player in the Big 12, is going to come hungry to this game, knowing Texas has gotten the better of her twice in one season. But I expect this game to be a rock fight. Texas and Kansas State are the number 1 and 2 scoring defenses, respectively, in the conference. We talked about how the Longhorns, behind Lauren Ebo, are starting to find their groove in the paint area, but K-State is second in the Big 12 with 5.4 block shots per game. Look, Texas has easily disposed of the Wildcats multiple times this season, but when Ayoka Lee is on the other side of the court, you cannot afford to look ahead to the next game. For my prediction, I'm taking Texas to beat the Wildcats for the 3rd time by a score of 58-52, and I think they'll make it to the semifinals of the Big 12 tournament.
Fair prediction. Now, segueing out of the postseason and back to the regular season, a big point of conversation with the women's team in particular has been the attendance at the women's basketball games. So, not so positive for most of the season, but it seemed as if there was a great crowd on hand Saturday night. What can you say about the crowd and the support in general for the women's program?
Well, one of the last regular season game for the Texas women's basketball team to be played at the Frank Erwin Center, the Longhorn faithful showed out and put 12,506 fans in the stands. Head coach Vic Schaefer is a big believer in establishing a home court advantage, much as Chris Beard has tried to do in his first season with the Longhorns on the men's basketball side. Schaefer publicly appealed to the student body last month, expressing his discontent for the lack of students in the stands. This season, Texas finished with an average of 3.4K fans per game, a figure severely inflated by the final 12,000 plus person crowd. The men's basketball, on the other hand, was averaging 12,000 plus every home game. I want to highlight what Vic Schaefer did in pledging $10,000 to the neighborhood Longhorns program if 10,000 fans showed up. The campaign rallied the student body together to support not only the women's basketball team, but a great cause in the NLP. The Texas basketball program is in good shape right now with Schaefer and Beard both trying to ignite excitement in the student body around their respective teams. And with the new Moody Center opening up next year with a decreased capacity, Texas could have a true home court advantage that the Frank Erwin Center never really provided. Of course, it's up to the students and fans of Texas alike to actually show out to these games, but both Schaefer and Beard are used to raucous atmospheres at Mississippi State and Texas Tech, respectively, and I think they're both trying to bring that same energy to Texas on the basketball court. It's been a fun process to watch.
It certainly has been a fun process to watch this season, and we certainly appreciate all that Coach Schaefer is doing for the community. So thank you again for joining us, Carter. When we return, Robert Gonsoulin will be here to recap Texas baseball's busy weekend in Houston. We'll be right back. Welcome back into College Press Box. Over the weekend, top-ranked Texas baseball traveled to Houston to participate in the annual Shriner Children's Hospital Classic. The Longhorns had a loaded weekend, finishing 2-1, winning their first 2 games against Tennessee on Friday, LSU on Saturday, and then falling to UCLA make that on Sunday. So we are now joined by baseball analyst Robert Gonsoulin. Thank you for coming on, Robert.
How's it going?
Going well. So the Longhorns went down to Houston this weekend, as we said, to play in the Shriner Children's Classic at Minute Maid Park. Let's hear how they continued their hot streak of wins against ranked opponents, picking up 2 out of 3 wins over the weekend, starting out very, very strong. Let's hear it.
Well, the Horns started out very hot. They continued their hot streak of wins, like you said, having won their first 11 games. They so far have outscored their opponents 82-18, acquiring a 91% win percentage. They came out firing against ranked opponents this past weekend. That includes LSU and Tennessee. The team racked up 8 hits and 4 RBIs that led to a 6-2 win over LSU. Much of these numbers can be attributed to the center fielder, Douglas Hodo, as he went for 2 for 4 on the day with 2 hits and 3 RBIs. The California kid, Murphy Staley, also had himself a day. He also went 2 for 4. He homered in the 8th inning, and then meanwhile, Tristan Stevens was able to bump his season record up to 3-0 as he struck out 7 batters and gave up 0 earned runs. Harrison would finish the game for the Horns and get the save. The defensive end was strong for Texas as they only gave up 1 run in the 8th inning off a sacrifice fly. It was a huge overall win that helped provide for the Longhorns campaign as why they should have the #1 spot in the nation.
Yeah, and Texas should likely still be #1, even though they picked up the loss on Sunday. There has been a massive hot streak, winning their first 11 games of the season, but that did come to an end on Sunday to the hands of UCLA. What are your thoughts on the game? How did Texas fall in their first loss of the season?
The Longhorns struck out 14 times, and they left 5 men on base in the entire game. Texas was able to rack up 5 hits. However, that wasn't enough as UCLA's pitching was on point. Only 2 Texas players were walked the entire game. I have to tip my hat to UCLA's Kelly Austin, who took his first start on the mound and accounted for 8 of the 14 strikeouts served to Texas. The Longhorns were without sophomore pitcher Tanner Witt in Sunday's outing, as he was scheduled to start but was removed from the lineup earlier in the day due to a muscular injury above the elbow. After the game, head coach David Pierce mentioned in a press conference that Witt's injury didn't have any structural damage. I'm no medical expert, but with that news coming from the head coach, I can hope that Witt's injury isn't too severe and will be back on the mound soon.
So for now, Texas is going to prepare for a home-and-home series. They're going to play 2 games against Texas State starting tomorrow night. What are your thoughts? What's your preview for the weekday 2-game tilt between Texas and Texas State?
Well, you really got to rely on Douglas Hodo right now. He's been hot recently. He was able to get on base quite a few times in the College Classic, even though he ended up with only 1 hit against Tennessee. He did score 1 of their runs, then came back the next day and homered for the very first time against LSU. He finished Saturday night with 2 hits and 3 RBIs. Overall in the season, Hodo remains near the top of every stat in the batting category. He ranks 3rd on the team with a .321 batting average while also having a .400 on-base percentage. To come up with these numbers, Hodo has acquired 17 hits and 6 RBIs on 53 at-bats. He's gone 8 for 23 in the past 5 games, and it seems as if the numbers are getting a little bit more consistent each game as he's been able to kind of stay at the top of the batting order and remain as the leadoff hitter. To add to this, he hasn't committed a single error all season so far.
Douglas Hodo has been a huge factor for Texas in the first 2 weeks of the season. Was a star as a freshman last year. Hope that he can continue that throughout his Longhorns career. Well, thank you for joining us, Robert. And when we return, we will recap the last week in Texas sports. You won't want to miss it. We'll be right back. Welcome back into College Press Box. So this past Sunday, the Texas Longhorns club baseball team competed against the Texas State Bobcats for the Gulf Coast South Showdown. The Longhorns earned the win with a score of 13-6. Player of the game was number 21, Cesar Prieto, who recorded 4 RBIs on the afternoon. Texas Soccer won their spring season opener on Saturday, blanking Texas State by the score of 3-0. Jilly Shimkin recorded 2 goals for the Longhorns, and senior goalie Savannah Madden recorded the shutout. Texas was without stars Lexi Massimo, Trinity Byers, and Holly Ward, who are preparing for this month's CONCACAF U20 Women's Championship. Texas women's tennis swept number 32 Central Florida 4-0 at the USTA National Campus on Sunday. The win improves the fourth-ranked Longhorns to 9-3 on the season as they will open up conference play on Friday at home against Texas Tech. 12th-ranked Texas women's golf tied for 4th place in the Darius Rucker Intercollegiate last week. Freshman Bohun Park stood out for the Longhorns, finishing in 2nd place with a 2-under-par performance. Texas will be back in action on March 13th at the Northrop Grumman Intercollegiate in Los Angeles. And we will take a look at the week ahead in Longhorn sports. First, Texas baseball will return to the dish to take on Texas State on Tuesday and Wednesday. Tuesday's first pitch will be at 6 p.m. on ESPN+, while Wednesday's game can be seen on Longhorn Network at 6:30. Texas softball will head to Denton for a Wednesday showdown with North Texas, a match that can be seen on Longhorn Network at 6 p.m. The Longhorns will then play host to Minnesota for a 2-game set on Friday and Saturday, with Friday's first pitch being at 5:30 and Saturday's at 6:30. Both games will be carried by Longhorn Network. Texas men's tennis will face off against arch rival Texas A&M in College Station at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, while Texas men's basketball will begin their Big 12 tournament run on Thursday, taking on 5th seed TCU at 11:30 a.m. on ESPN2. If the Longhorns advance, they will play in the semifinals on Friday, and with both men's and women's tennis will be in action this weekend, as the women's team will host Texas Tech on Friday at 3 p.m., while the men will host Ohio State on Saturday at noon. Texas women's basketball will tip off their Big 12 women's tournament on Friday. They will take on the 6th seed Kansas State Wildcats at 7:30 on ESPN+. And finally, Texas rowing will travel to Dallas to take on SMU on Saturday night. Well, that'll do it for this week's episode of College Press Box. Be sure to tune in to our other shows this week, including College Crossfire on Wednesday and the 1-0 Sports Show on Friday. On behalf of all the crew here at Texas Student Television, I'm Jason Kinander. Thank you for joining us, and have a great night.